Allopreen by Envysparkler. Read by My Lost and Found. Summary. Tim retreats to Titan's Tower after he's hit with Ivy's pollen. This fic is about 4,800 words and one chapter. This PODFIC was recorded for Voiceteam 2025 for the challenge In Their Shoes. This PODFIC is for Raven. As always, link to the fic is in the description. And on with the story. By the time Tim was situated, the cold had crept through his fingers and halfway up his arms. He tucked them under his shirt, next to the hot pack, and shivered. The first few seconds it took him to unstick his fingers and tuck the blanket back around himself felt like an eternity. 5 hot packs, 1 under his knees, 1 at each side, and 2 on his chest. And he was still shivering like he was stranded in Gotham Bay in the middle of January. It wasn't true cold. He knew that. His temperature was perfectly fine. But that didn't stop him from nearly shuddering out of his skin. He hated the sensation, hated it to his core. It reminded him too much of nights shivering in a big, empty house, with nothing but shadows to hear his soft sobs. But he had no choice. Ivy was his least favorite opponent because she was so liberal with her pollen. Even with a rebreather on, even with a mask, she'd covered so much of their surroundings with the stuff that it was practically impossible to escape. Not that Tim ever told Bruce that. He told him he'd gotten hit with pollen once, back at the very beginning, when his fierce determination to keep Batman alive had cracked to reveal the fragile hope for companionship nowhere else to be found. And Bruce had held him. Like Tim was a real Robin, and not just a placeholder to keep the man alive. He'd held Tim throughout the entire night, warm and safe and real, and his face had been a glittering mask of tears the whole time. Because Tim wasn't Jason, and Tim wasn't there to take Jason's place, even if Bruce had decided to adopt him after his dad died. And Cuddle pollen wasn't a real injury. No one needed to pretend like they wanted to cuddle with Tim. It wasn't going to kill him. Sure, he was going to have a miserable night curled up on the couch, wrapped in blankets and heat packs. The tower wasn't supposed to be empty. There was supposed to be at least someone there. Someone Tim could curl against so the sensation of cold would dull. But it wasn't debilitating. Tim even got some work done, if he pushed himself. But he was tired, and the past month had been especially exhausting. The Red Hood, Bruce's slow breakdown every time the Joker popped up, and apparently Jason was alive, and Tim couldn't quite bring himself to budge from under the blankets. It was cold, but it was holding. His fingers thawed slightly, and the shivers eased something more bearable as Tim shifted to wedge himself further into the couch, a facsimile of human warmth. Like this, he could almost pretend like someone was holding him. He could almost pretend that the hole in his heart didn't hurt worse than the ice in his veins. Tim focused on practicalities. The heat packs would last him an hour. The pollen usually lasted around 4 or 5. Or at least that was how long it would take before Tim could get up and use a couple of hoodies to ward off the remaining chill. The next time he got up to refresh the heat packs, he'd need to get some tea. The hyper-awareness of coffee would do him no favors here. But that meant he could nap for an hour, if the shivering let him rest. Tim curled up tighter, squeezing his arms around himself like he could make himself believe it was someone else if he tried hard enough. His cheeks were wet. He barely even registered it. The void wasn't real, he reminded himself, as he did every time. If it wasn't real, why did it hurt? His mind could fuck off with the philosophical rejoinders anytime now. Thanks. Breathing through shivers, letting the warmth of the heat packs curl against his fingers, trying not to wonder where Bruce was right now. If he was hugging Alfred, if he would open his arms, if Tim crept back and asked. Tim strangled that train of thought. His time in Wayne Manor was more limited now than it had been ever before. Jason was alive. Jason was back. And as soon as Bruce fixed whatever fight he'd started, Jason would be home. And Tim would leave. He suppressed the traitorous part of himself that pondered if Jason didn't come back, then Bruce would still need someone by his side, that Tim could still be Robin, could still be wearing a stolen suit, like the selfish child he apparently was. Tim was not selfish. Tim wasn't Bruce's kid. Tim had a job, and that job was drawing to a close. And he knew it wouldn't be permanent. He allowed himself to get attached, which was his own stupid fault. At least he'd have the Titans. Maybe he'd have to change his name and start making his own gear, but he could live out in San Francisco, in this giant, empty base that was really only occupied on the weekends, because everyone else had lives and families to go back to. Tim tightened his grip on the heat pack until the warmth escalated to near searing, and exhaled slowly. It was the stupid Pollen. He was being maudlin. He should stop thinking about Bruce and focus on his cases. They were struggling to find leads for a missing shipment. First, they thought it was the Red Hood, but the goods had disappeared from the Tricorner docks, and Hood didn't have a foothold there, which meant that someone was either taking advantage of Crime Alley's recent turmoil, or there was another plot afoot. And the one thing about Gotham was that trouble always came in threes.
Warning.
Echoed through the main speakers.
Unauthorized entry. Sector A3.
Tim stared at the ceiling. Are you fucking kidding me? He said flatly. The room didn't answer, because the room wasn't sentient, because Tim hadn't actually implemented those plans to fit an AI into the tower before Bart had seen the plans, shrieked something about the robot apocalypse, and burned them all. Which meant that Tim had to get out of his nice, cozy cocoon to find the stupid alarm that had been tripped, fix whatever bug had gotten into the system before the tower went into security breach mode, and get rid of the annoying beeping. If this was one of his idiot teammates forgetting their entry codes, Tim was going to hug them, but give them a lecture at the same time, because how difficult was it to remember the codes? God damn it, they were all metas. The heatbacks had to be sacrificed. Tim could only carry one of them, squished against his side, but he managed to keep 2 blankets, one wrapped around him like a burrito, and another, bigger one, as a cape, half trailing behind him as he made his way to the 3rd floor.
Warning. Unauthorized entry. Sector B3.
I got it, Tim grumbled. Great. It was spreading, which meant that this wasn't a mechanical problem, which meant that Tim had to both shut down the alarms and figure out who was trying to hack them. If it was Luther again, Tim was going to gift wrap Khan and drop him off. He was tired of the tower being ground zero for Luther's custody disputes.
Warning. Unauthorized entry. Sector B4.
Tim, 2 steps from the 4th floor, froze. He knew how the alarm systems were linked. The 3rd and 4th floors weren't on the same pattern, which meant that either someone had hacked into 2 separate alarm systems, extremely worrying, or...
Hey, replacement.
Or there was actually someone unauthorized in the tower. Red Hood was lounging casually against the wall, watching as Tim took the remaining steps down to the 4th floor. The red helmet gleamed even in the dim light, white lenses fixed on him, the eerie, blank metal concealing any hint of an expression. Tim didn't know if it was his lack of armor or the cowl footage skewing perspective, but Jason looked a lot bigger in person, a lot more intimidating, a lot more unfriendly. His mind chose that moment to point out that Jason had tried to shoot Batman multiple times with the very same guns visible in the holsters. "Jason!" Tim tried not to squeak. "Hi. What the hell are you doing here? What brings you to San Francisco?" The helmet tilted, and Tim could feel the assessing gaze wash over him. He was already shivering, though, as hard as he tried to suppress it. And the added chill of Jason's sudden appearance didn't make much of a difference. He'd heard Jason's rage-filled rants, after all of the bitter, seething words about how Bruce had replaced him. From a certain point of view, it was even true. If Jason had come here looking for a fight, a particularly fierce shudder racked through him.
You know the story about cuckoo birds?
The distorted voice asked pleasantly. Tim's mouth went dry. "Yes," he said quietly.
Cuckoo mothers lay their eggs in birds' nests, you see.
"I said yes," Tim said louder. Jason broke off. Tim couldn't tell what he was thinking. His posture was languid, and that stupid helmet hid any visible cues. But the tone of voice didn't foretell anything good. Sure enough, the next words dripped with malice.
Then you understand I'm telling you to leave before I shred your wings to pieces.
Jason hissed. Tim almost took a step back before his mind caught all the way up and reminded him that he didn't have wings, so as colorful as the threat was, it wasn't real. On one hand, this was good news. It meant that Jason still wanted to come home, if he was designating Tim as the interloper. On the other hand, Tim thought he'd have more time. "This is the Titan's tower," Tim said, quiet but firm. "You can't kick me out of here." Jason straightened up at that, and this time Tim did step back. Jason was almost a head taller than him, fully armored, and Tim had a heat pack and fingers that wouldn't stop shaking.
You can keep your precious tower,
Jason snarled.
but you're Robin, and Gotham is mine.
Tim blinked. It was the pollen heightening his emotions. He knew it. He just needed...
Give me the suit, and don't come back.
Tim blinked harder. The only light was what was coming through the window, so if he angled his head, Jason shouldn't be able to see the tear tracks on his cheeks. "Fine," he said curtly, to cover up the hoarseness. He spun on a foot to head back up the stairs. He clutched the heat pack harder. The cold wasn't real, he reminded himself. The black hole inside him wasn't real. His heart tearing into little pieces under the onslaught of Jason's disdain wasn't real. He knew this was coming. He had to get a hold of himself. The pollen was twisting his emotions, desperation singing in his veins to the tune of abandonment and loneliness and all the fucking nights. No, he knew this was coming. He didn't hear Jason's footsteps, but he could feel the weight of the gaze boring into his back as he stumbled back up all the stairs. He passed the common room where his little blanket nest was waiting. Soon, just as soon as Tim handed over his life for the past 3 years and headed up to the bedrooms. He had gear scattered around the tower, in the armory, in the training rooms, in the labs, and he sincerely hoped Jason wouldn't ask him to collect those items too. It would take him a while to hunt them all down, especially with trembling fingers, and it would take him even longer to reverse engineer enough of it to get a decent uniform back together. The suit, his staff, and his belt were in his room, however, and he heard a mechanized hiss as Tim unlocked the door. He didn't bother to see if Jason was still following. He went to the closet, grabbed the suit, the belt, and his staff, and turned around to thrust it at Jason, who was standing way too close to Tim. He had to fight not to back himself into the closet. "Here," he said shakily, holding out the gear. "Take it." It wasn't very heavy, but Tim felt like something was ripped away from him when Jason took the suit. The golden R gleamed in the low light, and the loss was a lance speared through his core.
"What did you do to it, replacement?"
Jason asked as he shook out the suit, and Tim shivered harder. He couldn't listen to Jason's taunting. Not right now. Not raw and wounded and oh so alone. "Get out," Tim said flatly, and Jason huffed what could have been a laugh.
"Testy,"
the mechanized voice retorted.
"Remember, if I see you in these colors again, I'll turn you into a splatter on the ground. Clear?"
"Crystal," Tim managed to say without his voice cracking, and he stayed, rooted to the spot, until Jason walked back out the door. Then he took 2 steps back into his closet, slid down the wall, curled up, and gave in to the sobs. He hadn't gotten even to say goodbye. Not to Bruce, to thank him for everything he taught Tim, for adopting him, for being the maybe father in Tim's hesitant dreams. Not to Dick, who had been an amazing and patient mentor, who ruffled Tim's hair and smiled at him and laughed with him until Tim almost dared to label him a big brother in his head. Not to Alfred, who was always so patient and forthright, who had welcomed Tim into the manor and was the first person to believe that Tim could be Robin. Not to Steph, or Babs, or Cass, or... He knew he could see them again. The Titans and the Justice League often worked together, but Jason despised him, and Tim would need to distance himself from the bats, lest he incur the older boy's wrath. He imagined Jason going home, imagined Bruce hugging him, and Alfred crying, and Dick cuddling with him, and he was happy for Jason. He really was, but that didn't stop his heart from shredding into tiny little pieces. He could wrap his arms around his legs. He could press his face into his knees. He could curl around the warmth of the heat pack, but he couldn't convince himself that he was anything but alone.
"You know the story about cuckoo birds?"
Tim knew. Tim knew they screamed for attention and more food and drove the other birds, the real kids, out of the nest. Tim just didn't know what happened to cuckoo birds when they were pushed out of the nest. Because that was the thing about being a cuckoo bird. They knew full well that no one wanted them. Not the mother that foisted them off to a different bird. Not the siblings that were edged out. Not the poor, bedraggled, not real parents. Well, Tim supposed he wasn't a bird anymore. He sucked in a wet, shaky breath and shivered through the exhale. The knees of his pants were damp from tears, and the lump in his throat was choking him. He couldn't handle this. He wanted to Zeta back to the cave to call Bruce, to get a hug, but he couldn't. Not anymore. Tim shook harder. Each muffled breath was a broken sob. The ice stretched up his arms and his legs, stealing warmth 1 numb inch at a time. He wanted to stop feeling the emptiness inside of him. He wanted to stop feeling anything at all. Near silent footsteps, a mechanized sound, something warm landing on his head. Tim blearily raised his head, and the warm thing slid off. Heat pack. He blinked at it, then squinted up at the red-helmeted figure looming in the doorway.
What's wrong with you? You need 4 metal heat packs.
Jason asked him sharply. Tim wished he would just leave already. He couldn't give Jason the fight he was so clearly itching for. He couldn't even protect himself against Jason's words, each one a sharpened blade. Nothing, Tim said wearily, uncurling from the blanket enough to grab the second heat pack. It wouldn't do much against the void enveloping him, but it was a nice thought.
You're wrapped in 2 blankets, sitting in the closet,
Jason said, crouching down until Tim had no choice but to stare at the red helmet.
Something's clearly wrong.
Tim tightened the blankets around him and exhaled slowly. It's just pollen, he said quietly. If Jason was looking for a sore spot to poke, then this would hurt. But there wouldn't be any real consequences to Jason ripping the blankets and heat packs away. Tim was already half numbed. He had forgotten what warmth felt like.
Pollen. Like Ivy's pollen?
Tim tucked his head back against his knees.
Heat packs don't help against Ivy's pollen.
Tim made a muffled groan. Jason got what he came for. Couldn't he just go away?
Replacement. You know that heat packs don't work against Ivy's pollen, right? It's human warmth, not artificial warmth.
Tim took a deep breath. I'm aware, he said as levelly as he could manage. Jason was silent for a stretching moment. Just when Tim was about to hope that maybe he'd left, he spoke up.
Okay, then clue me into it while you're huddling in a closet, alone.
Alone sliced through Tim's heart like a poisoned blade, and he couldn't suppress the sharp gasp.
No, seriously, where are your little friends? For that matter, how did Bruce even let you leave?
It looked like Jason wasn't going to go away until he finished extracting whatever torment he'd come here to cause. Didn't tell him, Tim said quietly. And they're not here.
Why didn't you tell him?
Because then he'd feel responsible to do something about it, Tim said flatly. And I'm sure your opinion of me is extremely unflattering, but I don't inconvenience everyone around me for things I can handle on my own. A stretching moment of silence.
Okay,
Jason said slowly.
I'm not gonna unpack that statement, but are you telling me you do this shit every time you get hit with Cuddle pollen? Bruce hasn't hugged you ever?
Why did Jason sound so surprised? Tim wasn't Bruce's son. Tim was only a temporary Robin. Did he think Tim did it on purpose? That he'd wormed his way in to truly take Jason's place? Once, Tim admitted quietly, and the memory of that hug still flayed him to the bone.
Excuse me?
I didn't take your place, Jason, Tim said wearily. Batman needed a Robin, but Bruce would never replace you. I wasn't his son. He was falling apart and needed someone to help him, to hold him together. That's all I was. The truth stung like salt water in raw wounds. He heard the sounds of shifting, movement. Something clicked. Something sounded like leather against leather. Something rustled against the ground. He couldn't even drag his head up to see what Jason was doing. Trashing his room, probably. Tim didn't have the mental energy to care. Wow. Jason's voice sounded far too close and no longer mechanized. You can't even cuckoo properly. What was that supposed to? A hand curled around his knee, and it felt like fire. Tim couldn't hold back the sharp inhale, uncurling enough to see Jason. Jason, no helmet, no armor, staring down at Tim with electric green eyes, arms coming out to grab Tim's shoulders and pull him out of the closet, and Tim couldn't stop him, not when delicious, burning warmth spread from Jason's fingers like a wildfire, chasing away the ice as Tim was pulled forward, pressed against a broad chest, as arms curled tight around him and... Oh, no. Jason could still hurt him. Jason could still hurt him badly because Tim would do anything for this warmth, would beg and plead and scream for the safe he'd protect, curled around him like a dragon. Shivers dying near instantly as ice melted like it had never been there. Tim would do anything, and all Jason had to do was let go and let the cold come crashing back in. No. Tim was shaking, but it wasn't from the cold. No, Jason, please. Not this. Anything but this. He could handle the misery and the loneliness, but this was outright torture. You really want to just suffer for the next couple of hours? Jason growled, the vibrations rumbling through his chest. Tim could taste salt water on his lips. Tim couldn't. He wanted to rip himself away, but his fingers curled into Jason's soft undershirt instead of pushing back. He'd forgotten what this was like, how desperately he needed the warmth, and now it was too late. He'd lost. Kid? Jason asked, as Tim buried his face in his shirt and shook with near-silent tears. What happened? Please don't. Don't what? I'm not going to give you Crime Lord Cooties replacement. Don't do this. Tim begged quietly. What do you want? I won't come back to Gotham. Promise, just please. Okay, Jason said through gritted teeth. If you feel that strongly about it. His arms loosened and Tim was shoved off. Tim knew it was coming, and yet cold slammed back into him like a wave breaking over his face. And he was drowning and he was screaming and it hurt like someone shoved 1,000 needles of ice into his soul. The void was howling and his chest felt like someone had reached in and yanked all the important parts out. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't move. He was numb, but it wasn't enough. It was ice everywhere, and Tim couldn't do anything but suffer. He couldn't control his body. He couldn't stop his arms from blindly flailing out, from desperately seeking the warmth he knew was there. His mind was shrieking that it was just going to hurt worse, and warmth all around him, cocooning him, holding him tight even as he scrambled against a soft shirt and clawed up and wrapped his arms around, locking his fingers together to make sure his grip wouldn't fail. "Would you?" A low voice growled in his ear. "Make up your fucking mind." "Don't," Tim pleaded. "Don't do this," he wanted to say, but it came out. "Don't let go." The arms around him squeezed automatically, pulling him further against the broad chest. "I realize I'm an asshole," Jason said levelly, "but I'm not that much of an asshole. I'm not gonna let you go." Promise? What a stupid thing to ask a goddamn crime lord. "Promise," Jason said, and it didn't sound like the Red Hood. It sounded like Robin. Tim relaxed despite himself, burying his face against Jason's shoulder and trembling through the dying shudders. One hand started tracing gentle circles against his back, and Tim eased further into the grasp, shifting to curl up more comfortably in Jason's lap. The other hand drifted up, and Tim melted when fingers carted through his hair. He couldn't remember the last time someone had. He couldn't remember if someone had. Dick had ruffled his hair plenty of times, but it wasn't this. It wasn't slow, steady strokes. It wasn't the barest edge of nails against his scalp. It wasn't soft tugs at the tips of his hair. "Shh," came the quiet voice as Tim went boneless. "It's okay. I'm not going anywhere." The fingers combed through his hair again and again and again, rhythm gentle and soothing. "You can relax." The warmth was all around him, and Tim sank into it like it was floating on a cloud. "You're not alone." Lie. Enough of his consciousness dragged itself up to point out. But on the next stroke down, it dissolved. There were no thoughts here. There was only the haze of warmth and safety and gentleness that surrounded him completely. "I promise I won't leave, Robin," came the firm voice, and Tim surrendered. "What kind of absolute moron?" "Jason, no, please do explain your reasoning. Explain how you had a child in your custody for 3 years and gave him one hug. One. "Jason, I didn't." "Didn't what? Care?" "Of course I care." The shout broke through the haze, cracking open the veil of sleepiness around him. "I didn't know. The world's greatest detective couldn't figure out his own son is touch-starved." "Jason, I swear to you, if I'd known, But you didn't know, old man. How many times did you face off against Ivy?" "Off the top of my head, I have no idea. Why?" "Just wanted a ballpark of how many times the kid curled up in a closet and cried himself into exhaustion." Jason growled, voice dangerously low. "All I had to do was touch him to send him into a full-blown breakdown." "Jason." "He was screaming," Jason added. "You know, in case you cared, that's how much pain he was in." "Jay." "Said he wasn't gonna inconvenience you when he could handle it himself," Jason bit out. The rise and fall of a chest was soothing under Tim's cheek. "I'll let you imagine what a 15-year-old can handle by himself, or what he thinks he can handle by himself." Tim couldn't hear anything but quiet breathing, the flutter of a cape, someone clearing their throat. "I told him to give me the Robin suit," Jason said abruptly, "and he just handed it over." Something connected in Tim's head. They were talking about him. Agreed to never come back to Gotham. A harsh inhale. Said he wasn't your son. A choked breath. Jason. I'll admit, I was an asshole, and I definitely came here looking for a fight. But all that, I had no part in that. Jay, how could you not know? A heavy, deep sigh. Because I wasn't paying attention. The quiet voice admitted. Because I met him at one of the lowest points in my life, and by the time the darkness faded, I suspect he had gotten very used to focusing on my emotions instead of his. A hint of a growl rumbling against him. Because I didn't realize the depth of his insecurities. A soft hand rubbed against his cheek. Tim turned with it, blinking open, sticky eyes. Bruce, was looking down at him, cowl off but suit on, smiling but eyes sad. Hey, kiddo, he said quietly. The answering smile was drawn reflexively to Tim's face. How are you feeling? Fine, Tim replied, immediate and automatic. There was a snort beside him. Bruce's smile grew sadder. Okay, bud, he said softly. How about we head back to the manor? Alfred's made pancakes for breakfast. Tim would like that, but can't, he said, nestling further into the warmth surrounding him. Promise, Jason, I wouldn't go to Gotham. The sound that came from behind him sounded pained. Bruce's expression flickered. Oh, my sons, he whispered, leaning forward and pressing a kiss to Tim's forehead. Tim inwardly squirmed. What was that for? And Bruce curled an arm around him, firmly bracketing him with warmth on all sides. You can go to Gotham, came the hoarse voice, and you can have the suit back. Tim finally placed that Jason was behind him, that it was Jason's lap he was curled up in, that it was Jason's arms around him. He fought silently free of the grasp, to peer up at Green Eyes. What? But Jason wouldn't want him back, but Bruce was hugging Jason and Tim both, so Jason had clearly consented to coming back, but Tim wasn't really. He was just a replacement. A hand came up to tuck a lock of hair behind Tim's ear, soft and gentle. Jason's expression was a mixture of anger and upset and guilt, and his voice was much softer than that initial, vicious growl. You're not a cuckoo, baby bird, Jason said quietly. You're a robin. Bat Selenea, Chapter 129, Allopreen Altview. Summary. Jason was expecting a fight. Jason had to admit that he hadn't expected it to be so easy. He'd planned for a fight, had been hoping for a fight, and the replacement showing up swaddled in a blanket with red-rimmed eyes had thrown him off his game. His insults had barely landed. The kid had dismissed him as a threat, handed him the uniform, and told him to leave, cool as a cucumber, as though Jason was just an inconvenience. It would have sparked the pit if it wasn't so odd. Some part of him was still a detective, and with Robin not emerging from his room, Jason was free to poke around the rest of the tower. He already knew that no one else was home, and he checked 2 floors before he found the little nest of blankets on the couch. There were 4 heating pads amid the tangled mess, still warm, and Jason recalled the way the kid had been all wrapped up. Was he sick? Jason felt a pang of something that could have been called concern, and swiped the heat packs. He was just solving a mystery, he told himself. And figuring out Robin's reaction was good planning for the future, because there was no way the replacement would actually take this whole thing lying down. Maybe he'd even get some taunting in. Then he found the kid curled up in his closet, shivering violently, and his thoughts left his brain. He didn't remember throwing the pack back, but the kid looked up in surprise.
What's wrong with you? You need 4 heat packs.
Jason barked, trying to push down the squirming, twisting eels in his stomach. Nothing, the kid muttered, and Jason crouched down until the little shit had no choice but to look at him.
You're wrapped in 2 blankets and sitting in the closet,
Jason pointed out.
Something's clearly wrong.
It's just pollen. What?
Pollen,
Jason repeated, still very confused.
Like Ivy's pollen?
But they were in San Francisco, and no one was in the building, and the kid was using heat packs.
Heat packs don't help against Ivy's pollen.
The kid just curled up further and continued to ignore him.
Replacement. You know that heat packs don't work against Ivy's pollen, right?
Jason couldn't say why it was so important to him that the kid understood, or why his heart was beating too fast.
It's human warmth, not artificial warmth.
I'm aware, the kid said, dull and resigned. Just... what the hell was going on here?
Okay,
Jason said, as levelly as he could manage.
then clue me in as to why you're huddled in a closet, alone.
Nothing but choked sounds.
No, seriously, where are your little friends?
Surely the Titans wouldn't have left the kid alone like this.
For that matter, how did Bruce even let you leave?
Batman should have been all over this, smothering the replacement in hugs that Jason wanted so desperately to get back. Didn't tell him, the kid muttered, and they're not here.
Why didn't you tell him?
Jason asked, bewildered. Because then he'd feel responsible to do something about it, the replacement said flatly, looking up with a disdainful expression. And I'm sure your opinion of me is extremely unflattering, but I don't inconvenience everyone around me for things I can handle on my own. The pit wanted to get annoyed at the supercilious tone, but Jason was too busy trying to fit the words in an order that made sense. He didn't succeed.
Okay,
Jason said, stretching out the word, because there were too many things in that short spiel, too many alarms going off in his head.
I'm not gonna unpack that statement, but are you telling me you do this shit every time you get hit with Cuddle Pollen? Bruce hasn't hugged you ever?
It was ridiculous. It was ludicrous. Ivy threw the stuff around like it was glitter. And compared to the other toxins the rogues used, cuddling someone for a few hours was a good deal. The replacement was just being dramatic. Maybe he'd fought with Bruce or something and was clinging to his wounded pride. Once, the kid mumbled.
Excuse me?
The kid's expression shifted to something distinctly tired. I didn't take your place, Jason, he said, cutting unrelentingly to the heart of Jason's issues. Batman needs a Robin, and Bruce would never replace you. I wasn't his son. He was falling apart and needed someone to hold him together. That's all I was. What the fuck? It looked like Jason had just stumbled upon a can of worms and desperately needed a garden to redirect them to. First things first, if Robin was under the influence of Cuddle pollen, he had to be keenly feeling the cold, and Jason was the only person in the tower right now. He shedded his armor, his weapons, and his helmet, and crouched down again. Wow, you can't even cuckoo properly, Jason muttered, as snidely as he could when he was preparing to hug the little shit. Tim snapped his head up at the first touch, inhaling sharply and watching Jason with painfully wide blue eyes as Jason pulled him out of the closet and into his lap. No, Tim shivered, his expression fracturing. No, Jason, please. Wounded pride it was. You really want to just suffer for the next couple hours? Jason snarled, except the kid was shuddering harder, burying his wet face against Jason's shirt. Kid? Jason's voice dropped. What happened? Please, don't. Don't what? Jason snapped irritably. I'm not gonna leave you with Crime Lord Cooties replacement. Don't do this. The kid sniffled. What do you want? I won't come back to Gotham. Promise. Just please. And here Jason was helping him out of the goodness of his heart, and yet the kid was acting like Jason was eating him. Okay, Jason said, jaw clenched. If you feel that strongly about it. He'd learned his lesson about helping people who didn't want help. He shoved Tim off his lap, and it took one breath for the kid to start screaming. Jason's heart sank through the floor, and he hurriedly reached out for Tim again. The kid was writhing and clawing at his own skin, tears streaming down his face. Tim clung to him the moment Jason drew him closer, arms locking around Jason's neck so tightly, Jason had to force down the momentary fear that he was being strangled. Would you make up your fucking mind? Jason growled tightly, trying to situate Tim so the kid wasn't suffocating him. Don't. The kid's voice broke. Don't let go. Oh. Jason squeezed his eyes shut and breathed out slowly, tightening the hug. I just realized I'm an asshole, Jason said evenly. But I'm not that much of an asshole. I'm not gonna let you go. Promise? Promise, Jason swore, and the kid melted into a puddle in his lap. Jason kept him close, absently carting a hand through his hair, and continued the gentle message as the kid slumped further and further. Shh, Jason hummed. It's okay. I'm not going anywhere. The sobs had died down to hiccups and sniffles. You can relax. You're not alone. The kid shivered at that, and Jason held him firmly in place. I promise I won't leave, Robin. A gasping breath and a slow, quiet exhale. Batselinea, Chapter 176. Allopreen and Endnote. Summary. Jason is trapped under sibling cuddles. Jason, trapped on the couch under one clingy monkey of a younger brother and one clingy octopus of an older brother, contemplated the ceiling as he pondered how his life had gotten to this point. He decided that it started the night he stole the Batmobile's tires. That had kicked off this whole mess. Yep, it was all because of that. I hate you, Jason said when a dark-haired head peered into view. Bruce, infuriatingly, only blinked at him. What did I do? Bruce asked, politely leaving off the "this time" they could both hear. Jason glowered at him. Bruce continued to play clueless billionaire. This. Jason gestured at himself, or did his best to gesture at himself when his limbs were all trapped. You did this to me. Did I? Something quirked on Bruce's lips that on anyone else would have been a grin. I don't know, Jay. I'm pretty sure this is all on you. Jason snarled. The effect was somewhat reduced when he was being used as a pillow by one drooling kid and one drooling adult man. Jason had tried to escape when Dick had found them, but had eventually been forced to surrender. Hell hath no fury greater than a dickhead being kept from a cuddle pile. I blame you for giving me siblings, Jason glared. It's all your fault. Whatever you say, J-Lad. Ugh, Jason hated him, despised with every cell in his body. Stupid, smirking billionaire. Jason was tempted to claw himself free and let Bruce handle the two. Except he wasn't convinced Bruce would do a good job. It was the kitchen microwave incident all over again. Jason absently wondered if Bruce had gotten that lifetime ban lifted by Alfred. Shouldn't the pollen have worn off by now? Jason grumbled, squirming slightly to ease the pressure on his arm. Neither of the two woke up, conked out to the world, and it was having a soporific effect on Jason. He kept wanting to close his eyes and take a nap. It should have, Bruce said, the faintest furrow of worry in his scrunched eyebrows. Though withdrawal effects are sometimes observed in cases when the target doesn't receive touch soon enough. Jason growled at the memory of Tim, curled into a ball in the closet, so small and so tired. It should pass within the day. Jason squeezed Tim tighter and tried not to think about Tim going through withdrawal symptoms on his own, afraid to tell anyone. And the golden boy? Jason asked gruffly, yawning halfway through. What's his issue? He didn't get hit with pollen. Do you truly believe that Dick would ever pass up an opportunity to cuddle with his little brothers? Bruce asked, smiling warmly down at him. Jason continued scowling, but another yawn disrupted it, scrunching his face and making the world go blurry for a moment. Get some rest, Jay. You look tired. Running a criminal empire wasn't easy, Jason wanted to shoot back at Bruce, especially because Bruce had failed. Batman had failed. Someone had failed something, and he kept losing his train of thought. The afternoon sunlight was warm, and the presence of his brothers was comforting, and the itchy lock of hair was being swept out of his face, and Jason couldn't help sinking down. There was a soft kiss against his forehead, and Jason fell the rest of the way to sleep. I love this fic. There is just something so heart-wrenching about it in the perfect way. And oh my gosh, I felt so many emotions while doing this, and I loved them. Just the perfect amount of pain. And I love Tim. Tim is my favorite. And just Jason is a close second, I'd say. So I just love anything with both of them where it's just basically Tim's suffering and then Jason's oh, you're kind of fucking sad. I'm in distress because of that. I gotta do something. Oh no, a fix, pat, and him comforting. I love all of that. So goes with everything I love, and also, hopefully, it's what Raven liked, because like I said at the beginning, this podfic was recorded for Voiceteam 2025 for the challenge In Their Shoes, which is essentially recording a podfic containing one of your team members' favorite things. And some of my team members put together a list, and on Raven's list was hurt/comfort, like taking care of people, and Jason Todd being brought back into the Bat Fam, and Tim Drake being brought back into the Bat Fam / discovering he's like a part of the family and not a placeholder. And I felt like this just like hit all of those on the mark. This fic was a bit longer than I was planning on doing, because I tried to do a fic for all of the like people on my team that put a list in the thread. And so I was trying to do more short ones, but I felt this one was literally perfect. It hit like so many of those points, and I love this fic, so I was so happy to podfic it. So no, yeah, I hope this was good, if Raven is here listening, and I hope everyone else also enjoyed it. But no, yeah, if you enjoyed this and if you enjoy those, make sure to go to the original work linked in the description. As always, go leave a kudos, go leave a comment, whatever you can. I am sure the original author appreciates it. Anyway, that is all for this time, and I will see you guys next time.